hailing from a variety of social and cultural backgrounds, and driven by motivations spanning the pursuit of power and control to the satisfaction of sadistic and unspeakable desires. These serial predators left trails of horror that stretched across borders and decades. Their actions not only shocked the communities where they occurred, but also gripped the world's attention, sparking debates about the nature of evil and how fragile our sense of security can be. The stories that follow are real, often brutal, and undeniably disturbing. Understanding these cases, however uncomfortable it may be, can offer us valuable insights into the darkest corners of the human mind and perhaps help in preventing and identifying dangerous behaviours in the future. Los Angeles, June 1984. Summer arrived with the promise of sunny days and peaceful nights. Little did anyone know that a predator was about to turn the city into a landscape of nightmares. Richard Ramirez, a 24-year-old with a dark past in Texas, arrived in California with a single aim: to kill. His victims were chosen without a clear pattern: men, women, the elderly, and even children. Ramirez would break into homes at night, often committing acts of extreme violence once inside.
Do you admit to being evil, Richard?
We are all evil in some form or another, are we not?
I'm asking you the questions, my friend.
Yes, I am evil. Not 100%, but I am evil.
The hunt ended in August 1985, when residents of East Los Angeles recognized him and gave him a beating before the police arrived. His trial was a media circus, with Ramirez throwing tantrums and making satanic salutes to the court.
Satan is concerned, I believe in a malevolent being. His description eludes me, but I have felt powers that are evil.
Sentenced to death, he died in prison in 2003 while awaiting execution. On a cold December night in 1978, police surrounded a house in Des Plaines, Illinois. Inside, under a thin layer of earth in the crawl space, lay bodies. That smiling bloke who dressed as a clown for children's parties, John Wayne Gacy, harboured a dark secret. Hours earlier, Robert Peast, a 15-year-old boy, had gone missing. His distraught mother contacted the police, and suspicion fell on Gacy, the last person to see him. Gacy, a local builder with a reputation for being an eccentric but seemingly harmless fellow, denied any involvement. However, the persistence of the detectives and some inconsistencies in his statement led to a search of his property. The first bodies were found there. The investigation deepened, revealing a macabre pattern that went back years. Gacy lured young men to his house under false pretenses, tortured them, sexually abused them, and ultimately murdered them.
He was killed in the house in self-defense.
Who killed him then?
I stabbed him.
Yeah, and it was an issue of self-defense. Why was he in the process of assaulting you, or what?
He was coming at me with a knife. I just took the knife away and twisted it in his hand, and that's what killed him.
His Pogo the Clown persona was a grotesque facade for the brutality he committed in secret. He appeared in hospitals and parties, entertaining children while carrying the weight of his heinous crimes. The final death toll reached 33, most of them young men and teenagers. Some were found buried on the grounds of the house, others dumped in the Des Plaines River. Gacy's trial in 1980 captivated the nation. The defense tried to plead insanity, but the evidence was overwhelming. Testimonies from survivors of his attacks and the grim discovery of the bodies painted a picture of a calculating and cruel serial killer.
I don't know if you notice here, we got pictures of every one of the victims here. And believe it or not, for the last 12 years, I've studied these photos of the victims. And when you look over at the photos, I have no recollection of any of them. Never met them. They're just names and faces. And when you look at them, I consider myself the 34th victim. I consider the families victims as well, because they did not get justice from the shoddy investigation all the way down.
In April 1999, Colombian police were excavating land on the outskirts of Pereira, following leads about the disappearance of a teenager. But what they found was far worse than they expected. Within hours, a nightmarish scene unfolded. Dozens of skeletons of children and adolescents, many still with tattered clothes and ropes tied around their wrists. Investigators already had a suspect. Days earlier, a 12-year-old boy had escaped his kidnapper. His name, Luis Alfredo Garavito Cubillos, who had become known as La Bestia, the Beast. A short man with thick glasses and a soft voice. These were the descriptions given by the boy in shock after his escape. When arrested, Garavito didn't resist, and under questioning confessed to the initial crimes.
Yo cometí una serie de conductas que infringen las normas penales y las morales. Soy un ser humano, igual a cualquier otro, con unas fallas, pues, pero no que yo sea peligroso.
Born in 1957, Garavito was an unassuming man who posed as a street vendor or beggar. His harmless appearance was his most potent weapon. His victims were poor boys, orphans, or street children between the ages of 8 and 16. Garavito exploited the innocence and vulnerability of his victims, often using small amounts of money or insignificant gifts as bait to lure them into his deadly web. Once under his control, these innocent youngsters were subjected to torments that defy human understanding, their lives tragically cut short by extreme violence.
¿Y esto qué es una quemadura?
Quemadura, sí, de tercer grado. Esto fue cometiendo un homicidio en Palmira el 3 de febrero del año 99.
¿Un homicidio?
Un homicidio, sí, un niño.
¿Y el niño lo mató?
Sí.
Garavito confessed to murdering at least 193 young people, but it is estimated that the total could be over 300. His crimes spanned 11 Colombian departments, and possibly even Ecuador and Venezuela. He led investigators to more than 60 burial sites. At times, he wept and spoke of remorse. At other times, he laughed and justified his crimes, claiming that voices compelled him to do them.
¿Aparecen los rostros de los niños?
No, nunca, no. He pedido perdón. Yo estoy de acuerdo que yo cometí un poco de homicidios supremamente execrables. Yo lamento todo eso. Estoy arrepentido.
¿Me está usted manipulando?
¿Y por qué lo voy a estar manipulando?
Parece que estoy hablando con un simpático profesor de filosofía.
Garavito was sentenced to 1853 years in prison, a symbolic sentence since Colombian law limited the maximum prison term to 40 years. Still, he would never leave prison. Inside, he became a constant target for other inmates who tried to kill him several times. At the age of 66, Luis Garavito died in a prison hospital succumbing to complications from cancer. In December 1999, the name of Javed Iqbal Mughal was all over the news in Lahore and soon after around the world. He sent a shocking letter to the police and a news editor confessing to the sexual assault and murder of 100 young boys between the ages of 6 and 16. In his grim confession, Iqbal detailed how he lured his victims, many of them street children and orphans, to his residence in Lahore. The police and reporters who investigated Iqbal's house found a horrifying scene that corroborated his confession, along with photographs of many of his victims, carefully labelled with their names and ages on handwritten flyers. Iqbal's stated motive for his heinous acts was revenge against the Lahore police. The sentence handed down by the judge stipulated that he would die in the same cruel way he had committed his crimes. However, this sentence was publicly questioned by the then Home Secretary, who stated that such punishment would not be permitted. Javed Iqbal and a young accomplice, who had also been convicted, were found dead in their prison cells on the 8th of October 2001. Despite some suspicions of foul play, their deaths were officially ruled as suicide. The cold expanse of Siberia, with its long nights and harsh winters, was the backdrop for a series of crimes that terrorized the population for nearly 2 decades. A predator lurked in the shadows of the Irkutsk region, taking the lives of dozens of women. This killer, who would become known as the Angarsk Maniac or the Werewolf, was Mikhail Popkov, a police officer whose badge of law enforcement hid a sadistic and brutal mind. Popkov worked as a police officer, which allowed him to gain the trust of his victims and move around without arousing suspicion. Between 1992 and 2010, he murdered dozens of women with estimates reaching over 80 victims, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in Russian history. Popkov would approach women by offering them lifts, often at night and in isolated spots. He would take them to remote areas, where he sexually assaulted and killed them with extreme cruelty, using tools such as knives, screwdrivers, and axes. His crimes were marked by severe mutilations of the victims' bodies. For years, Popkov managed to evade detection due to his position as a police officer. The investigation faced numerous hurdles, and it was only in 2012, through large-scale DNA testing involving thousands of police officers in the region, that Mikhail Popkov was finally identified and arrested. In 2015, he was sentenced to life imprisonment for 22 murders. However, the investigations continued, and Popkov confessed to dozens of other crimes. In 2018, he received a second life sentence for an additional 56 murders. Herman Webster Mudgett is a shadowy figure in American criminal history, often cited as one of the country's first serial killers. His story unfolds against the backdrop of turn-of-the-20th century Chicago. Using the alias Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, he built a 3-story hotel that would become known as his murder castle. The building was a macabre labyrinth of dead-end corridors, secret rooms, doors lockable from the outside, and even a basement equipped with a post-mortem table and an incinerator. Holmes used the hotel to lure victims, often guests of the World's Fair, who were then manipulated, robbed, and murdered. His method often involved assuming false identities, bigamously marrying several women and convincing them to transfer their assets to him before they disappeared. He also ran insurance scams, faking his own death or that of accomplices to pocket the insurance money. Although Holmes confessed to 27 murders, many believe the actual number of victims may be much higher, perhaps exceeding 200. Holmes's downfall began with a failed insurance fraud scheme, leading to his arrest in 1894. The subsequent investigation revealed the extent of his heinous crimes, including the murder of his former business partner, Benjamin Pittersell, and his 3 children. In 1896, Holmes was convicted and hanged. Dennis Rader, known by the chilling moniker BTK Killer, emerged as one of the most infamous serial killers in the United States. Born on the 9th of March 1945 in Pittsburgh, Kansas, Dennis Rader terrorized the city of Wichita and its surroundings between 1974 and 1991. For nearly 3 decades, he managed to maintain a double life. He was a married man, father of 2 children, and a seemingly ordinary employee who even presided over his church council. At the same time, he concealed a dark and perverse side that compelled him to commit acts of brutal violence. His modus operandi involved breaking into homes, usually subduing entire families or lone women. He would tie them up, torture them, and ultimately murder them, often by strangulation or suffocation. After the murders, Rader sent letters and later other types of provocative communications to the police and local media, detailing his crimes and taunting the authorities. After a break of years, during which the murders and communications ceased, Rader resurfaced in 2004, resuming the sending of messages. It was this resurgence, ironically motivated by his desire for recognition and the feeling that his crimes were being forgotten, that led to his capture in 2005. The police managed to track him down through a floppy disk he sent, on which metadata revealed his identity. The revelation that the BTK killer was a neighbour, a colleague, a religious leader, exposed the terrifying reality that evil can hide behind a facade of normality. In 2005, Dennis Rader confessed to the 10 murders he was charged with and received 10 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. In a small flat in Milwaukee, an unbearable stench permeated the hallway. Neighbours had been complaining for weeks about a foul odour, which they put down to accumulated rubbish or a dead animal. None of them could imagine the crimes being committed behind the door of flat 213. Jeffrey Dahmer committed unimaginable atrocities against his victims. Born on the 21st of May 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer seemed, at first glance, like a shy and intelligent boy. However, from an early age he displayed disturbing behaviours, collected the bones of dead animals, and had dark fantasies about absolute control over other bodies. His parents, caught up in a troubled marriage, didn't notice the signs that something was very wrong. At the age of 18, Dahmer committed his first murder. Stephen Hicks, an 18-year-old he met while driving. After taking him home, Dahmer beat him to death with a dumbbell, dismembered the body and buried the remains in the back garden. Despite the gravity of the crime, he wasn't caught at the time. After a disastrous stint in the army and a life of alcoholic excess, Dahmer settled in Milwaukee, turning his flat into a scene of nightmares. He seduced young men and teenagers, many of whom were from marginalized minority groups. Once in his clutches, he would drug them, strangle them, and in some cases practice acts of necrophilia and cannibalism. Dahmer kept parts of his victims as souvenirs. Polished skulls, hands preserved in formaldehyde, and even frozen organs that he consumed in macabre rituals. He even tried to create zombies by injecting acid into the brains of his victims, hoping to keep them alive and more docile.
Not because I was angry with them, not because I hated them, but because I wanted to keep them with me. And as my obsession grew, I was saving body parts such as skulls and skeletons, and eventually I did turn to cannibalism.
Dahmer's luck ran out when Tracy Edwards, one of his potential victims, managed to escape the flat in handcuffs and alerted the police. Upon entering the premises, officers encountered photographs of dismembered bodies, a barrel with decomposing human remains, and the head of a victim stored in the fridge. Dahmer was arrested, and during questioning calmly confessed to 17 murders, detailing his methods with terrifying coldness. In 1992, he was sentenced to 16 life sentences, equivalent to more than 900 years. On the 28th of November 1994, Christopher Scarver, an inmate who claimed to hear the voice of God, beat Dahmer and another inmate to death with a metal bar. The Milwaukee cannibal died as he had lived, amidst blood and violence. In the quiet town of Hyde, England, Harold Shipman was seen as a caring and dedicated doctor. Born in 1946, he built a career of trust, looking after his patients with apparent zeal. However, behind the facade of professionalism, he hid a dark mind and a horrifying secret. Over nearly 3 decades, Shipman wove a web of deceit and death. It is estimated that he murdered over 200 patients, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in modern history. He administered lethal doses of diamorphine, a potent painkiller, to his victims, often in their own homes. After their deaths, he falsified medical records to simulate natural causes, avoiding suspicion. The trust his patients placed in him was the perfect weapon for his heinous crimes. The deaths under Shipman's care only began to raise questions in 1998, when the daughter of one of his patients noticed inconsistencies in her mother's will, which inexplicably left her entire estate to the doctor. The ensuing police investigation revealed a macabre pattern of suspicious deaths linked to Shipman. In 2000, Harold Shipman was tried for the murder of 15 of his patients, a number believed to be just the tip of the iceberg. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, but never confessed to his crimes or revealed his motives. In 2004, he took his own life in prison, taking his secrets to the grave. In the early 2000s, DNA technology finally unraveled a mystery that had haunted Seattle for nearly 2 decades: the identity of the elusive Green River Killer. The arrest of Gary Leon Ridgway in 2001 marked the culmination of an exhaustive investigation, revealing the man behind a trail of disappearances and deaths that stretched back to the early 1980s. It was the summer of 1982 when the bodies of young women began to be discovered in isolated areas near the river that snaked through King County, Washington. Marsha Chapman, Cynthia Hines, and Opal Mills were the first to be found. Their disappearances were initially treated as isolated cases. But as more bodies surfaced, the terrifying truth began to unfold: a predator was on the loose. Local police, overwhelmed and without concrete leads, soon found themselves facing a terrifying enigma. The victims shared similarities. Many were young, vulnerable, and some worked as sex workers. Fear spread through the community, especially among women living on the fringes of society. For nearly 2 decades, the killer lurked in the shadows, continuing to take lives while police followed numerous false leads and faced the frustration of a lack of solid evidence. Gary Ridgway, a truck painter who lived a seemingly normal life with his wife, moved through this scene of death without raising significant suspicion for years. He was a face in the crowd, an ordinary man who hid unimaginable depravity. His ability to blend in and exploit the vulnerability of his victims allowed him to continue his crime spree for so long.
In your vehicle?
Yeah, so every time I opened up my wallet, there would be a picture of my son on one side, behind my ID. Here's my ID. I hide my name, flip it over, and there's my ID and my son's picture on the back side, and they'd see that, and that would lower any big defenses.
The crucial turning point in the investigation came with advances in DNA analysis. Semen samples, found on some of the victims, were finally compared to samples collected from Ridgway during his 2001 arrest for an unrelated crime. The result was positive, breaking the decades-long deadlock. Confronted with the irrefutable scientific evidence, Gary Ridgway initially maintained his innocence. But the pressure of the evidence and the prospect of the death penalty led him to confess in macabre detail to his crimes. Ridgway confessed to 48 murders and agreed to cooperate with authorities to locate the remains of other victims. His confessions revealed a cold and calculating man, driven by a visceral hatred for his victims, whom he saw as disposable. His victim count could be much higher, with him claiming to have killed up to 71 women, making him one of the deadliest serial killers in American history.
Death of Marie M. Mulver.
Guilty.
For the death of Martina Otherly.
Guilty.
Charge in count 31 for the death of Debbie M. Abernathy.
Guilty.
It was the early 1970s, and a wave of disappearances of young women terrorized the United States. The victims were mostly college students, beautiful, intelligent, with long hair parted in the middle. They vanished without a trace until their bodies were found in isolated locations, brutally violated and murdered. No one suspected that the culprit was a charming man with an easy smile and intense blue eyes. Theodore Robert Bundy was the typical ambitious young man, a law student, a volunteer in political campaigns, and considered extremely persuasive, but behind the mask of an educated and well-spoken man hid a monster. He used ingenious tactics to lure his victims. He would pretend to be injured, use crutches, or act as an authority figure to gain trust. Sometimes he would simply approach with a smile and an innocent invitation. When the victim lowered her guard, Bundy would attack. He would beat them, strangle them, and often return to the crime scenes to commit necrophilia. Some bodies were decapitated, and he kept heads as trophies in his flat. For years, Bundy evaded the police, moving from state to state and reinventing his identity. But in 1975, his luck ran out. A patrol officer in Salt Lake City, Utah, noticed a worn brown Volkswagen Beetle driving suspiciously in a residential neighborhood. Upon approaching the vehicle, the officer found a series of suspicious items in the boot: a mask, an ice pick, ropes, and a crowbar. Bundy was arrested for possession of burglary tools, but that arrest would be the first step in unraveling one of the most notorious serial killers in history. Bundy, until then, was just an ambitious law student and volunteer on a suicide crisis hotline. After his arrest, investigators connected his car and physical descriptions to a series of disappearances of young women, including the case of Carol Deronch, who survived an attempted kidnapping by Bundy months earlier. She identified him in a photo lineup, and Bundy was charged with kidnapping and assault. While awaiting trial, Bundy gained access to the courthouse library and jumped from a second-story window, escaping for a few days before being recaptured. On the 23rd of December 1977, he escaped again, this time by squeezing through a hole he made in the ceiling of his cell. Free, he fled to Florida, where his appetite for violence only increased. In January 1978, he broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University and attacked 4 students in a frenzy of violence. Wielding a piece of firewood taken from a nearby stack, Bundy moved with cold determination. In the rooms of Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, violence erupted. Brutal blows silenced their lives, leaving behind only horror. In other rooms, Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler were attacked with the same fury but miraculously survived. Bundy's rage was not satiated. Just a few blocks away, Cheryl Thomas was asleep in her home when he attacked her, inflicting injuries that would leave her scarred. In February of that year, Bundy's luck began to change. A routine traffic stop in Pensacola, Florida, for a stolen car led to his arrest.
Saying, you feel that everything will turn out all right, that you are innocent. Do you still feel that?
Yeah, more than ever. I feel good about it, and yes, I feel that I'm right, and yes, I feel I'm going to make it. No doubt in my mind.
Authorities at the time did not know they had captured a killer, but the meticulous work of forensic science would soon reveal the truth. Bite marks found on the lifeless body of Lisa Levy would be the irrefutable evidence linking Bundy to the victims of the Chi Omega house. The year 1979 marked the beginning of a judicial spectacle that captured the nation's attention. The trial would be televised, bringing Bundy into American living rooms. Ted Bundy, with cold audacity, decided to represent himself, a macabre stage for his distorted mind. But neither his charm nor his intelligence could obscure the glaring evidence. The verdict was delivered by the court: guilty of the murders of Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, guilty of the assault of Kleiner and Karen Chandler. 2 death sentences were handed down, but justice was not yet complete. In 1980 came another trial, this time for the brutal murder of Kimberly Leach, a girl of only 12 years old. Once again, the verdict was guilty, and another death sentence was added to the previous ones.
So much grief, so much sorrow, so much pain for so many people. Where did it start? How did this moment come about?
That's the question of the hour, and when one...
For nearly a decade, Bundy vehemently denied his crimes, but as the shadow of execution loomed, the truth finally emerged. In his final confessions, he admitted to taking 30 young lives in 7 different states between 1974 and 1978. On the 24th of January 1989 at Florida State Prison, Ted Bundy's saga of terror came to an end